We are 2 Samuel chapter 10, a little bit of context regarding this unique chapter. It kind of breaks a bit of the chronological flow of our histories. I say that because as you read through, as we work through this particular chapter, you're going to kind of be reminded a bit of chapter 8. And chapter 8 is a bit of a summary of David's incredible conquests, his victories. Saul has died. David has taken the throne. David has unified the country. David has established a new capital city, being Jerusalem. He's brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. It is the political center. It is the religious center. And David then is motivated to follow through with what God had originally commanded the children of Israel, and that is to take the land that God had given them. They had had seasons where they were pseudo-obedient to that, but David, he goes on the offense and isn't on the defense. So much of, as we've been looking at the interactions with the Philistines or the Amalekites or the Ammonites, the Moabites have always been Israel playing defense. They get attacked, they defend, they're trying to keep the peace. David, in chapter 8, goes on the offense and he expands the borders of Israel in an incredible way. As far north as the Euphrates in the northern part of Syria, as far south down to the Nile River. There wasn't much beyond the Jordan. You had kind of Transjordan, the Edomites, not much. It was a lot of desert. About 50,000 square miles of territory, roughly the size of Alabama. David has commanded, conquered, is ruling, and reigning. And that is recorded for us in chapter 8. It's a summary, an overview. Now, our author here in chapter 10 kind of goes back and pulls out a bit more specific narrative of some of these battles for a very intentional reason. You see, chapter 10 is not placed there on accident. This story, this exchange, there's a reason to it, and the reason, as we'll see, will be to set the stage, establish context for probably David's darkest moment in chapter 11. And so, as we work our way through chapter 10, kind of quickly, it does overlap a bit with 2 Samuel 8. But it's pulled out more thematic to establish an idea, a principle that's very relevant to what we'll see in chapter 11. So a little context. The parallel passage in our harmonies in 1 Chronicles 19 covers chapter 10. We won't look at chapter 19 of 1 Chronicles because it's very much just a pure repeating of what we have here recorded for us in 2 Samuel. It happened, verse 1, after this, that the king of the people of Ammon died, and Hanun, his son, reigned in his place. The Ammonites are a foreign people. They're a bordering nation group. The king dies. As customary, his son takes his place, Hanun. But David said, he gets word of this development. He says, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, as his father showed kindness to me. Now, we have no record in the biblical account of the king of the Ammonites showing favor and kindness to David. We don't have the full accounting of everything that happened in David's life. This is evidence that there had been in the past an exchange, a bit of kindness between Nahum's father and David. So David finds out his buddy has died, and he wants to do something nice. He wants to demonstrate, he wants to show kindness. So David sent by the hand of his servant to comfort him concerning his father. And David's servants came into the land of the people of Ammon. David is wanting to demonstrate kindness. He's not asking anything in return. He sends a delegation, which is very normal in the Middle East. It's normal today. There's a bit of a state funeral. He sends ambassadors. He probably picks out some of the nobility of Jerusalem, some of the elders of the various tribes. The delegation, this is not a group of riffraff. These are kind of the elites, the aristocrats of Israel, and they're coming to represent Israel, God, David. They're going to demonstrate kindness. So we're given David's intention. So you have this delegation that comes into the land of Ammon. But verse 3 we read that the princes of the people of Ammon, so the counselors around the king, they said to Hanun, their lord, do you think that David really honors your father because he has sent comforters to you? Has David not rather sent his servants to you to search the city, to spy it out, to overthrow it? These counselors of Hanun are immediately jumping to conclusions, questioning David's intention. Guys, David isn't interested in showing kindness. This is David. He's the warrior. He's cutthroat. He's brutal. He's been on the war path. The nation has been on war footing. He's not trying to show kindness. David is just covertly sending in spies. They're trying to spy out the land. They want to see what kind of leader you are. They're looking for vulnerabilities. They question David's intentions, his motivation. Now we know David's motivation is pure, it's noble, it's right, it's godly. But the counselors around Hanun convince him that it's the contrary. Therefore Hanun took David's servants, shaved off half their beards, cut off their garments in the middle at their buttocks, and sent them away. This is an incredible insult in Middle Eastern culture. I mean, it'd be an insult today. When we're told that they shaved half their beards, it's not as though they gave them a trim, that they trimmed it up. No, they went halfway through the face and shaved off half. In this particular culture, beards were very important. In fact, you can do some research in ancient cultures, but it seems as though that only the slave populations were clean shaven and that everybody else maintained healthy beards within Middle Eastern society. You weren't really considered to be a man unless you grew a beard, and then the prowess of your beard kind of demonstrated how manly you were. So David sends ambassadors to Ammon, and what happens? He's gone there. This was good, well intended. It was a kindness of his heart. He's doing a good thing. These counselors convince Hanun to do something terrible. They reject the kindness and return kindness with an insult, with injury. He insults them, cuts off half their beards. It takes a little while to grow a beard. Not only that, but before sending them away, they cut their robes at the buttocks. Meaning, not only do you have this delegation of upper class Israelis, part of David's crew, now half shaven, but they've also been depantsed. The robes cut off at the buttocks, meaning they've got at best mini skirts, now trying to flee out of Ammon. You can understand how this would be absolutely insulting, especially within the context that they had not come for any other reason than for kindness. You should always be careful the type of men you put around yourself as counselors. Because Hanun does something terrible here, but he does it why? Because the men around him read into a situation the wrong thing. They question the intentions of David, and they couldn't have been more wrong. And the whole thing ends up being a massive war with huge casualties because of mistaken intention. Be careful jumping to conclusions of the intentions of others. Sometimes they're very clear, but in other times, just be careful. It's a warning of our passage. Verse 5, so these guys leave. They've been shooed away. And so they tell David. Word gets back to David. So David sent to meet them. David leaves Jerusalem. He goes out to meet them because the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, wait at Jericho until your beards have grown and then return. I'd also imagine until you can find new pants, probably also included in the instructions. David here, very much kingly in his approach. The mention of Jericho is that Ammon was on the eastern side of the Jordan. And if you're going from the east, from the Jordan River, and you're going to make your way to Jerusalem, one of the main cities that you would go through would be Jericho. So the men are making their way back. David meets them at Jericho. He's like, guys, stay here. Regain some dignity. I know you're embarrassed. Let your beards grow back. Balance that joker out. Get some pants on. We'll deal with this appropriately, but I don't want you encountering any more embarrassment than you're warranted. Now, the people of Ammon saw that they had made themselves repulsive to David. I would say so. They picked the wrong fight. That the people of Ammon, they sent and hired the Syrians of Beth Rehob and the Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 foot soldiers. And from the king of Makkah, 1,000 men. And from Ishtob, 12,000 men. So Ammon realizes, man, we just kind of blew it. We stepped in it. We maybe overreacted. Now we're going to get a reaction from David. David only knows one type of reaction. You've really insulted my men. I have no other option. I'm going to take you out. So, knowing that they need reinforcements, they send to the Syrians, and they get basically a mercenary army to come to Ammon for protection. They anticipate some type of retribution. This is an army of 33,000 Syrians, in addition to the men of Ammon. Now, when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the army of the mighty men. Joab, as noted at the end of 2 Samuel 8, was the commander of David's armies. He was what we would call the head general. Joab rallies the troops. The army, we're told, of mighty men. This is the first time we've had this phrase, mighty men, mentioned within the histories. This will become kind of the description of David's inner circle, the group of men that had been with David from the beginning, these mighty men. We'll get to them more later in our travels. So the people of Ammon came out and put themselves in battle array at the entrance of the gate, and the Syrians of Zobah, Beth Rehob, Ishtob, and Makkah were by themselves in the field. So Joab is leading the children of Israel into battle. What's being described here is a two-fronted war. You have the men of Ammon at the gate, protecting the city, and you have the Syrians in the field. So Joab is going to have to take on this army of 33,000, kind of on a two-fronted battlefield. So Joab saw that the battle line was against him before and behind. He chose some of Israel's best, put them in battle array against the Syrians. The rest of the people he put under the command of Bishai, his brother, that he might set them in battle array against the people of Ammon. So a war on two fronts. Joab will lead one half of the group. Abishai will lead the other. Then Joab said, if the Syrians are too strong for me, speaking to his brother, then you shall help me. But if the people of Ammon are too strong for you, then I will come and help you. And then he says to the whole crew, be of good courage. And let us be strong for our people and for the cities of our God. And may the Lord do what is good in his sight. So Joab, the commander of the armies, devises a battle strategy. Abishai will take half the group. Joab will lead the other. He reaches an accord with his brother. He says, hey, we're going to go out. We're going to fight. If I'm getting shellacked, you need to send reinforcements. If you're getting shellacked, I'll send reinforcements. We will fight this two-fronted thing together. When you need me, I'm there. When I need you, you be there. I love that. I hope you have brothers in life or sisters that share that heart. Hey, we all fight our own battles. We all have our own wars. And I hope you have brothers in your life that in your moment of need you can call on and say, hey, I know you got your stuff going on. I could really use a hand. I got you, brother. Knowing that it'll be reciprocal. You know, one of the most frustrating things sometimes about friendship is when you have that one friend that always takes and never gives. You know who I'm talking about, right? That is always calling in favors, but the moment you need help, they're somehow mysteriously absent. Like they're more than willing to call to have you come to help fix this or to do that or to lean on for this or to be there for that. But man, when you need, man, friendship, brotherhood, it goes both ways. Joab and Abishai, we're going to go into this fight. You've got one flank, I've got the other. But man, when I need you, I hope you're there. And if you need me, I'll be there. And then he says, and these are few words that we have of Joab, but I love it. Be of good courage. Be of good courage. I hope you know that courage is a choice. That is something that we decide to do. That we decide to act in courage. That we decide to take steps of faith. That we decide to be courageous. Courageousness, courage, is a choice. And by the way, it's a choice that should be based in unshakable realities. That if we serve the God of all gods, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the creator of the universe, if we serve the God that can speak things into existence that didn't exist beforehand, shouldn't we be courageous? The God that would never leave us nor forsake us, the God that conquered the unconquerable, sin, hell, death, and the grave, shouldn't he provide us enough to choose courage? So Joab and the people who were with him drew near for the battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. So the Syrians bail. And when the people of Ammon saw that the Syrians were fleeing, they fled before Abishai and entered into the city. So they enter into the fortifications, the fortified walls. So Joab returned from the people of Ammon and went to Jerusalem. So this two-fronted war ends very quickly. The Syrians flee. They're like, we didn't sign up for this. The Ammonites are like, we're going to get into our city, and they lock the gates. And so what happens? Joab's like, mission accomplished. We're heading home. Now, when the Syrians saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they gathered together. Then Hadaezer, who's a character we found mentioned in 2 Samuel 8, which is why this overlaps. Then Hadaezer sent and brought the Syrians who were beyond the river, and they came to Helam. And Shobach, the commander of Hadazer's army, went before them. When it was told David, he gathered all Israel, crossed over the Jordan, and came to Helam. The Syrians set themselves into battle array against David and fought with them. Then the Syrians fled before Israel, and David killed 700 charioteers, 40,000 horsemen of the Syrians, struck Shobach, the commander of the army, who died there. And when all the kings who were servants of Hadaezer saw that they were defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and served them, so the Syrians were afraid to help the people of Ammon anymore. I want to point out something subtle here. Again, ancient warfare, battles, slaughters, etc. Like, why this chapter? Like, why does the author pull this story out of a summary? What is he emphasizing? I don't know if you noticed, but dealing with the initial insult of the Ammonites. Again, David had sent a delegation. They represented David, and they're treated poorly. What does David do? David sends Joab with the armies to deal with the problem. I know that seems very subtle, but David doesn't lead the armies into battle. Instead, he sends Joab to do it. And Joab, Abishai, they're good soldiers. They go out, they have a good strategy. They deal with the immediate threat. But do they have victory? Absolutely not. Instead, the moment that Joab could just bail out and come back home, they do. Yes, the Syrians fled. The Ammonites go back into their city. But instead of dealing with the problem decisively, Joab and Abishai leave it just out there. And then what happens? This emboldens the Syrians. Hadaezer gets his armies together, and they see a vulnerability within Israel, so they launch another attack. And it's at this point that David does what? Does he send Joab and Abishai into battle? No, David mounts up. You see, David should have gone beforehand because that was his job as king. You don't send somebody else in your place. You lead the charge. You carry the banner. You're the king. And David learns like, okay, I need to be leading the armies. Joab is a great commander. Abishai is a great lieutenant, but I am king. They fell short in victory, and then I have to clean up on Isle Joab. Now, what should David have learned? Because again, God gives a great victory. When David leads the armies, he slaughters the Syrians, sets them back, conquers the territory. Again, it's all summarized in the 8th chapter. But what is this chapter illustrating for us? It's illustrating for us that in the middle of all these conquests, there was a moment in time that God taught David an important lesson. When there are battles to be waged, you wage them. You don't send a proxy. When kings go to war, you're the king, you go to war, you don't send people in your stead. That should have been the lesson. Does David learn the lesson? Well, let's look at chapter 11. It happened in the spring of the year. Note, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. They destroyed the people of Ammon, besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. Again, this story, the most famous probably of David's life, second to Goliath, the story of his adultery with this woman Bathsheba. It begins with David not learning a lesson. Again, the previous chapter sets this context that God had given David a practical warning. When it's time to go into battle, go into battle. David's 50 years old at this point. He's 50. He's had incredible victories. He's conquered massive amounts of territory. He's built a city. He's fortified that city. And David reaches this point where it's obvious that he's wanting a little R&R, that he's wanting to step away from the battle for a measure of comfort. I mean, in David's mind, doesn't he deserve it? Hasn't he earned it? David's entire life has been one battle, one war after another, even before he became king. David's in his palace. And the context here is that he should have been leading the armies of Israel into war. That was his job as king. That was his calling as a warrior. And yet David decides, you know what? I'm going to send Joab out. And I'm going to hang back. And I'm going to relax. Like, understand, Christian, that your Christian life, the Christian experience, is described as warfare. It's called a spiritual warfare. You see, so many of these ancient stories dealing with actual war are to illustrate for us this idea that we are in foreign territory, in a foreign place, with a real enemy that wants to not play patty cake with us, but destroy us. And to take everything from us. We are always in a perpetual state of war. And the moment you think, hey, I can take a break, you are setting yourself up immediately for an attack. This is why in Ephesians, Paul would write to the church and he says that we are to put on the full armor of God, not once in a while, but every single day, we're to arm up. That we're to put on the full armor of God, knowing that we are in a perpetual state of war that won't end until the King of Kings yields a sword at the final war. It doesn't matter if you're a young man, if you're an older fella or lady, there isn't retirement in the Christian experience. And here you have David. When he should have been, he had already been taught this. He doesn't listen, he isn't learning, and he is setting himself up in a terrible place. He's in Jerusalem when he should have been at war. Then it happened. You know, I highlighted the beginning of verse 1, it happened. Then I highlighted verse 2, the first three words, then it happened. Because do these things just happen? No, not at all. It doesn't just happen. One evening, David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. Again, he had built himself a palace. The rooftops were flat. They doubled as kind of patio, living space. But David is up on the hill. He's able to walk up. It's in the evening. There's a cool breeze. I'm sure it's beautiful. It's springtime. This is when wars would begin. And he's able to just kind of like, he's got a bird's eye view over the city. So he's on the roof. And it's from this vantage point we read that from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. And then you know it's true, for it's inspired by the Holy Spirit. The woman was very beautiful to behold. In ancient cultures, they didn't have porcelain bathtubs like we have. It wasn't as though that there was a jacuzzi pool up on this other rooftop that David looked down upon. Because you're thinking, well, if she's bathing, your vantage point's a little limited. No, this is an ancient culture. You didn't bathe all the time. It was a bit of a luxury. Women particularly bathed, as we'll see within some context, after menstruation, after their period. It was a ritual cleansing, a purification. You would have a big jar, a kind of a cistern on your rooftop that would collect rainwater. And it would be from that rainwater, you would find a private location, you would undress, and you would be scooping out the water, pouring it over yourself, cleaning. So it's a very sensual thing to behold, which is why you would do it in a very private setting. And then when you're done with the actual bathing, the cleansing, because again, you couldn't bathe all the time, it was customary that you would then anoint yourself with olive oil. You would put olive oil all over your skin. You would anoint yourself with perfumes and spices. So this is a very X-rated type display that David's eyes stumble upon from his vantage point as being king. Now, the operative word here of the text that tells us we have a massive problem is the word behold. You see, if David had walked onto his rooftop, had glanced down, and had seen Bathsheba bathing, there's no sin to that. Please understand, temptation isn't a sin in and of itself. It will lead to sin, but it's not necessarily a sin. Martin Luther famously said, you can't keep birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from nesting in your hair. We live in a very sensual world, and you can't guard all the time what you see. It's impossible. But you can guard what you allow yourself to dwell upon. You see, it's not a sin that David looked down and saw Bathsheba bathing. The sin was that he beheld. He stood there and he watched. And he fantasized. Very quickly, just regarding how sin works. In James chapter 1, you don't have to turn there, but I'll read it for you. James writes, verse 14, he says, but each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. It's interesting that James, talking about sin, uses this word conception. Regarding human conception, a child is only conceived, it's only birthed, when two things become one or unified. A little anatomy, the the egg and the seed, right? What James is saying is that sin is conceived in our lives when two things are merged together: temptation and desire, or our will. You see, if David had just glanced and said, "Oh man, no, I don't need to," there would not have been the chance of something being birthed within him. But he stood there and he beheld, and he fantasized, and he dwelt, and the temptation then began to conceive with his will, and that produced sin. And then when sin is full bore, as we'll see practically, it yields death. Now what does David do? Looks down, sees a babe, naked, bathing. Should be in war, he's not. What does he do? Again, the story could have ended right here, but it doesn't. So David sent and inquired about the woman. It should be pointed out that this is probably nothing new for David. You know, we look at this and we're like, "Oh, David, what a fall!" But as you and I have been doing, we've been looking at David. Not with rose-colored glasses, we've been looking at David honestly, as the scriptures present him. And the reality is that reading these verses, David goes up on the rooftop. He sees a babe. He inquires of her. None of that should really be a surprise at all. Why? Because David did this all the time. This was not new in any way. 1 Samuel 18, he marries Michal. 1 Samuel 25, he marries a widow and then another woman. 2 Samuel 3, 1 through 5, while he's in Hebron, he marries 4 more women. 2 Samuel 5, 13 through 16, when in Jerusalem, he marries many more and then picks up stripper girlfriends, known as concubines. David was accustomed to doing what? Seeing a babe and taking her. Wasn't abnormal. It was what David did. So David sees this woman. He has no idea who she is. He does know that she's a babe. And so he inquires, like, "Hey, I want her." Again, this is where David has just gone nuts. From the beginning, David had a sexual proclivity. He had a sexual desire that was never tamed. David should have married Michal, stayed married to Michal, and that would have caged in this wild, rampant desire. Which is why God, knowing we're sexual beings, says, "Here's one person. Have all the sex in the world you want to with her or him. Enjoy, explore, have a good time." David was doing this with anybody he thought was good looking. So again, we shouldn't be surprised at this reaction. So David sent, inquired, "Hey guys, who is that woman?" And someone said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Now right there, the story should have ended. Because we're given very specific names. David wants to know who this woman is. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, you don't know? That's Bathsheba. She's married to this guy Uriah the Hittite." Now, the Hittites were not Jewish people. In fact, they descend from Ham and not Shem from Noah. Like they're not even a Semitic people. Now, we do have a lot of mention of Hittites. What this tells us, Uriah the Hittite, is that this was a man who had made a decision at some point in his life to reject the foreign gods of his people and to accept the living God of Israel, and he was grafted in. Meaning, within the covenant, he willingly was circumcised, and he chose to adopt the religion, and as a result ends up marrying a bride, and there's all kinds of examples of this. Uriah the Hittite is a good man. In fact, you'll find in 2 Samuel 23, that he's included in the list of David's mighty men. Uriah the Hittite. So right then, hey, that's Bathsheba, wife. should have ended David's inquiry. Of Uriah the Hittite, that's one of your dudes, should have ended it. The other word, operative word, is father. That she was the daughter of Eliam. Eliam, by the way, is also mentioned in 2 Samuel 23 as being one of David's mighty men. And his father, a man by the name of Ahithophel, I got that out, God bless me. In 2 Samuel 15, we'll get to Ahithophel. Ahithophel was an older man that was one of David's most trusted counselors. Hey, I saw this woman. She was bathing on the roof. 10. Knockout. I'm interested. Oh, David. You know, like Ahithophel, like one of your inner circle counselors, that's his granddaughter. That's the daughter of Eliam. That's the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Like these are men that fight for David, are under David's command. The grandfather is one of David's closest counselors. Right then, David should have been like, well, I'll go a different direction. But what does he do? He sent messengers and took her. The word took her, it doesn't imply coercion. No doubt David's the king, and this woman is 18, 19 at most. There is a power play dynamic, an authority dynamic that David is taking abuse of, undoubtedly. Bathsheba, while a victim in that way, still makes her own decisions here. Because the next phrase, that she came to him, and he lay with her. For she was cleansed from her impurity, and she returned to her house. David sent messengers, brings Bathsheba. How did that play out? This 50-year-old man with a young woman. Yeah, a side point. I heard pastors say this. I haven't done my own independent research to verify it. So I throw this out with a bit of a grain of salt. But 2/3 of the recorded failures in Scripture, so the people that you see failure with in Scripture, those failures happen in the last third of their life. Meaning that if you are an older man or a woman, you are at an incredible vulnerability. Be careful. My dad recently celebrated 45 years of ministry and was honored with it. My sister and I joked that it felt like we were going to his funeral. You know, it's like, you're not dead yet. You're 65. And I hope you realize that you can screw up everything tomorrow. 45 years of service, you can totally ruin tomorrow. Do you realize that no matter how good your life has been, how faithful you've been, you can ruin it all tomorrow? Every bit of it. David is 50 years old. He goes up on a roof and he sees a woman and he calls for her. He ignores every warning. Because what? Because temptation and his desire, his will have already conceived sin. And he is no longer thinking rationally. His passions have gotten the best of him. She came to him and he laid with her. This phrase, for she was cleansed from her impurity, is an interesting phrase. On one end, it gives the indication, and it's included for us here, to let us know that she had just finished her cycle. The reason for that is that Uriah is in war. She's just finished her cycle, which is probably why she's bathing. And it means that Uriah couldn't have gotten her pregnant. So make no mistake, what we're about to see, this child, is 100% David. Why? Because she's had a period and has not had any encounters with her husband. The other way that you can read it, and I think it's interesting and kind of plays within David's own depravity, is that ovulation occurs between 7 and 11 days after the end of a period. Meaning that David's up on the roof and he's looking down and he's seeing her and doing like this ritual bathing. Meaning that she's finished the days of purification after her cycle. She's cleansing herself so that she can go back in and take care of it. David's looking down and he's like, okay. I mean, this is birth control. Like, not only is she hot, but she's available and she's not at like this real fertile moment. I can do this and get away with it and there'll be no repercussions. So she goes home, but verse 5 tells us that the woman conceived. So she sent and told David and said, I am with child. Ruh-roh. Okay, there's so many points in the story that David could have thrown a parachute. He doesn't. No doubt for a couple weeks, he out of sight, out of mind. He's got his own little harem. He doesn't care. And then word gets to him from Bathsheba, hey, you know what my cycle looked like. We didn't think this could happen. My husband's not around, and you're the last one I did it with. Pretty sure you're the daddy. Now, just for context, and again, you don't have to turn there, but Leviticus 20, verse 10. Leviticus 20, verse 10, I'll just read it for you. The man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. That's the law. David, the man after God's own heart, is condemned by his own sin and his own actions. David and Bathsheba deserve death. The wages of sin is death. Now, David doesn't want to die. And David is sitting here thinking, what can I do? Now, what he could have done at this very moment is he could have hit his knees. He could have called for Nathan, his buddy, the prophet. He could have confessed his sin. He could have owned it. He could have looked people in the eye. He could have apologized. He could have laid himself down on the mercy or the judgment of God. David could have repented. He could have owned it. And the story probably would have been much different. But as we'll see next week, David doesn't do that. And what does he do? Well, he does the same thing that Adam and Eve did. And he does the same thing that you and I often do. Is that his first reaction, his initial inclination, that snap tendency when faced with sin is what? Is to hide. It's to hide. Adam and Eve hid from God. They tried to cover it up. They knew what the consequences were. They knew the repercussions. They knew what had happened. David, the story gets worse. The repercussions will be massive. The lesson, friend, is that sin has serious consequences. We live in a culture that normalizes and minimizes the consequences of sexual activity outside of marriage. You watch sitcoms, TV, what they put on the media. It's you can sleep around. It's just sex. It's no big deal. There are no consequences to it. There are no lasting effects. We live in a society that has tempered the reality that sex outside of marriage has consequences. And David's life will be destroyed. And it's a tragedy. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg of what becomes a very, very cautionary tale. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. And then the Bible tells us to be very careful to put into submission our thoughts. You can't protect what you see, but you can guard what you dwell on. Protect yourself. For the young man or the old man, guard your heart. You're running a race. You're running a race. And the goal is to finish faithfully. And if you're not in glory, which you're not, you haven't finished your race. And don't allow the enemy to take you out now. So, Father, Lord, we just